Press the point, easy to remember, it's got a rhythm that makes it flow as you speak it. Now, what is wisdom? Here's Solomon, known for his great wisdom. What is wisdom? A couple things. Wisdom is the ability to learn or knowledge, sorry. We'll start with knowledge. Knowledge is the ability to learn and retain facts. Okay? The ability to learn and retain facts. So maybe you're good at trivial pursuit. I mean, you can't figure out much in life, but you're great at trivial pursuit. You learn a lot of facts, and can remember them. Good for you. That's great. That's helpful. But that's not necessarily wisdom. Wisdom is the ability to then take that knowledge or the facts and to use that knowledge in the most effective way. I might know a lot, but not actually act on it properly. Okay? I might be real full with head knowledge of things, but can't get out of a paper bag, not figure things out at all. So often, most people have one or the other and not both. Okay? You find somebody that's got great knowledge and real wisdom in how to apply it and how to use it. That's a huge thing. And I would go so far as to say, I think it's even kind of rare. All right? A little bit of the background to the book. All right, back to the chart on page 58. Ready? A little bit of background. First, the author. The author is Solomon for most of these Proverbs. Solomon for most of these Proverbs. Now, some of them we know were Proverbs of Solomon. Solomon never sat down to write a book of his Proverbs. He just said these things all the time, and they got passed on orally, and some got jotted down, and then they got collected. And some of them weren't collected for 200 years later until King Hezekiah said, we better collect all these Proverbs of Solomon before they, disappear and get lost. So we've got mostly they're Proverbs of Solomon. But then we get to chapter 30 and the beginning of 31, and we've got Proverbs written by a guy named King Agur and a guy named King Lemuel. And these are guys we've never heard of before, never heard of since, but their names might give us a clue when we get to them here later. So we've got these two guys. And so the last few chapters are questionable. I mean, question is, did Solomon write them or not? Okay? Because King Agur wrote 30, King Lemuel wrote the first 9 verses of chapter 31, and then the rest of chapter 31 is an epilogue about the perfect woman. Okay, we'll get to that. Did Solomon write that? I don't know. It doesn't say. We'll get to that. Who are the recipients? The people of Israel. You could even add Solomon's son. I mean, right in chapter 1 in the introduction, he says, listen, my son, to your father's warning, take heed to your mother's instruction, or the other way around. So he's writing to his son, he's writing to all the people of Israel. This is wisdom on life and how life works, and people and how people work. And the date is between 950 and 750 BC. 950 is when Solomon reigned, 750 is when Hezekiah reigned. So through that time, and again, we know that Hezekiah commissioned a whole bunch of men to gather and write down all these Proverbs of Solomon that had been floating around and hadn't been written down. We better write these down too. All right? Again, the purpose is simply to give wisdom for daily living. Wisdom for daily living. If you do this, you're a fool. But you're wise if you do that. A righteous person, somebody whose faith in God, will do this. But a wicked person will do that. Now you notice these ones are but proverbs that I'm giving, right? This, but this. Those are the most fun ones, I think. All right, coming from the wisest man who ever lived. Okay, again, what's the purpose of the book of Proverbs? 2 things it's not. It's not a book to show the attributes of God. Last week, as we looked at the Psalms, we saw well, plenty about God. We learned lots about God through these Psalms and who he is and his faithfulness and his power and his glory and all that. The book of Proverbs is more about people than it is about God, right? It's looking at people and how people act and live and, and how they act. Now, there are little bits here and there about God in the book of Proverbs, but it's mostly observations about people, okay? So it's not to show the attributes of God like the Psalms were, and it's not a book of promises. And again, this messes up a lot of people. Okay, many of the Proverbs are quoted as promises, and sometimes people hold on to them and cling to them as this is a promise from God, and I'm sorry, but some of them are not. There are promises within the book of Proverbs, but they're very clearly noted, and we'll see that a little bit later. Instead, ready? It's a book of truisms. It's usually true that foolish people do this. It's usually true that wise people do this. Is it always true? No. But this is the observation Solomon is making. So we can avoid wickedness, we can avoid foolishness, and we can do the right, and we can do the godly thing. So that's the point of it as Solomon gives it to us. Okay, but they're truisms. It shows what normally happens when a certain set of conditions are followed. All right. Now, I'm looking for some volunteers again. I need some volunteers to read some verses, all right? Before you jump up, everybody, sit back down. It's a book of wisdom to show us how to use knowledge. If knowledge is information, wisdom is how to use that, how to apply it, how to live properly. So the Proverbs are a book of wisdom to help us use our knowledge. Okay, so I need some volunteers to read these verses as some examples, okay? So anybody? And yes, I did bring my Bible for a change. Thank you. I see that hand. Thank you. Thank you. We'll read them in order. Who else? We're missing the third musketeer tonight. Thank you. Okay. Somebody else? I need two more. Psalms, Proverbs. Anybody else? Oh, thank you, Janet. One more. Need one more. They don't realize I have $25 gift cards for each of you. I don't. Sorry. Okay, so we'll just read them in order, okay? All right, and then we'll roll around, and then I've got another set in a moment. So if you can stay up here for a couple of minutes. Okay, I need one more. Once, twice, and away she goes, as they say at the auction. All right. Okay, so we're going to read each one, and then I want to ask you, is this always true or usually true? Got the idea? Because that's what a truism is. This is usually the way this works. Always? Maybe not, but usually. All right, so here, let me hook this up, just step right up and read it into the mic. Go for it.
For lack of guidance.
Wait, hang on a sec. There we go. Thank you. Go ahead.
For lack of guidance, a nation falls, but victory is won through many advisors.
Okay, for lack of guidance, a nation falls, but victory is won through many advisors. Is that usually true or always true? Usually true, because what if both armies have lots of advisors, right? Okay, so it's a truism. It's usually true. Okay, next. Proverbs 11:28.
Those who trust in their riches will fall, but the righteous will thrive like a green leaf.
Ooh, it's a but proverb. You hear that? One more time, Olivia, if you would. Okay, listen to it again. It's one of the but proverbs. Go ahead.
Those who trust in their riches will fall, but the righteous will thrive like a green leaf.
Okay, usually true or always true? Usually. Do those who trust in their riches always fall or do some rich people actually die very rich? It's usually true, okay? Not always. Okay, Amanda. Proverbs 13:11.
11. Dishonest money dwindles away, but whoever gathers money little by little makes it grow.
Okay, always true or usually true? Usually true, yeah. And I mean, that's the idea of like RRSPs, a little bit. The second part is more true than the first part, about dishonest gain. Okay, good, usually true. Okay, and 15:1.
A gentle answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger.
Oh, that's good. Now, is that always true or usually true? Usually true. Sometimes somebody's angry and off they go, and then you just give them a soft, gentle word, and it makes them more angry, right? Because you're not back at them. Okay, now, one more, Proverbs 22:6. Listen carefully. Todd?
Train a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not turn from it.
Always true or usually true? Occasionally. We have a third option, occasionally. Okay, hang on. I got another set for you before you guys sit down. Thank you to each of you, but hang on just in a moment. Okay, usually if you train your kids up right, they turn out right? In the way they should go. But that's not always true. It's usually true. And many of us have heartbreaking stories of kids who were raised absolutely right, but then took their own detour with their own choices. Now, sometimes even the second part, when they're old, they won't depart from it. A lot of times we see somebody come back later in life, and that's wonderful too, but not all. So remember, this is a truism. It's an observation on how life works. Kids that are trained up in the right way, the way they should go, usually turn out right, make the right choices. And some come back later, great, but not always. And so here's the problem. That verse especially is one that a lot of parents hang on to like it's a promise from God. And it's not. It's not a promise that every child raised in a Christian home, trained up right, won't ever depart from it, or when they're old, they won't depart from it. It's not a promise. It's an observation by Solomon of how it usually works. I'd rather it was a promise. I'd rather it was a promise from God, but it's an observation. It's a truism. Okay, now, on the other hand, there is an exception to this truism rule. Okay? Now, sometimes Proverbs are promises, and these Proverbs are the exception to the rule, the truism, they're general observations by the wisest man, Solomon. No, how do you spot these? This is easy. You can spot the ones that are promises because God is in action in these, okay? When God is the action of the proverb, it is a promise. So back, and I need 4 of you. Okay, to read these. So Proverbs 6:16, 11:1, 3:12, and then 3:5 and 6. And when you have it, just step up. So listen to these. And is this always true? Well, if it's about God and what God thinks and what God does, then it's always true. Okay.
Do you want me to read more than just 16?
Where is this section here? Yes. Okay. Yeah.
There are 6.
Go ahead.
There are 6 things the Lord hates, 7 that are detestable to him: haughty eyes, a lying tongue, hands that shed innocent blood, a heart that devises wicked schemes, feet that are quick to rush into evil, false witness who pours out lies, and a person who stirs up conflict in the community.
Okay. So, does God always hate these things? He does. He says he does. And these are terrible things, like lying tongues, stirring up dissension in the community. Okay, good. So that's Proverbs 6:16. Now 11:1. Olivia, thank you.
The Lord detests dishonest scales, but accurate weights find favor with him.
Okay. Again, God hates cheating. He always hates cheating. For sure. Dishonest scales and all. Thank you very much. Amanda?
Because the Lord disciplines those he loves, as a father the son he delights in.
Okay, the Lord disciplines those he loves like a father would the son he delights in. Always true? Yes, yes. The discipline is different for each of us, but like a father will discipline the child so the child does the right thing and learns, so does God with the children he loves. Okay, and then everybody's favorite, Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. Janet.
Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all ways acknowledge him, and he will make your path straight.
Aha, thank you, thank you. So this is God, all right? This is an interesting one because there are 3 parts to our side of this equation, right? What are they? Trust in the Lord. Say it with me. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Don't lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him. And then there's God's side, and he what? He will direct your paths, or make your path straight is kind of a better today translation for that. Okay, so God will always do that. You put your trust in him, put him first, boy, he'll smooth out the way for you. It doesn't mean there won't be ups and downs, but he'll have that path ahead of you. So it's a promise. Okay, when God is the subject of the action, then it is a promise that you can count on. Otherwise, they're generally observations on how life works, how humans interact and follow God. Okay, good. Let's look at the outline to the book, shall we? Number 1, we have an introduction. Turn to Proverbs chapter 1, everyone, please. Proverbs 1, and if you're watching at home, get your Bible out and read along with us too. While everybody's looking up Proverbs 1, if you are watching at home, excellent, wonderful. Be sure to catch up. And we're going to take 2 weeks off over Christmas. So for those who have maybe been at home and you're falling behind, this is an opportunity to catch back up and then rejoin us on schedule on, I think it's January 10th. I think that's the Wednesday, the 10th. And when we'll start a whole new section, so it'll be perfect. We'll start looking at the prophecy books of the Old Testament. Isaiah, Jeremiah, Lamentations, Ezekiel, Daniel, and then 12 minor prophets. And so we'll do those in the new year. All right, good. Ready? Let's read this introduction, read the whole thing, first 7 verses, okay? Here it is. The Proverbs of who? Solomon, son of David, king of... Okay, so it's clear who this is, right? Very clear who this is. And what's the purpose? He tells us, for attaining wisdom and discipline, for understanding words of insight, for acquiring a disciplined and prudent life, doing what is right and just and fair, for giving prudence to the simple, knowledge and discretion to the young. Let the wise listen and add to their learning, and let the discerning get guidance, for understanding proverbs and parables, the sayings and riddles of the wise. And this is famous and should be starred or underlined in your Bible, I suggest. The fear of the Lord is what? The beginning of wisdom. But fools despise wisdom and discipline. So there's a but proverb there. And you notice how many of these, there's the 2 channels, right? Hebrew poetry, 2 channels with each, 2 lines pretty much with each of these 2. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Okay, good. Look at verse 8. Now, okay, stop a minute. Some of you are still scratching your head about Proverbs 22:7 that we looked at earlier, where it said, train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. And like, wait a minute, that's not a promise, hold on. Okay, here's partly why it's not a promise. Who is that verse directed to? Train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. Who's that directed to? Parents. Train up your children in the way they should go, right? Parents. But wait, look at the very next verse where we were, back to chapter 1, and look at verse 8. Listen, my son, to your father's instruction, and do not forsake your mother's teaching. Who is that aimed at? The son, the children. So in other words, even right there in the book of Proverbs, it says there's two sides, right? Parents, you can do everything right and train your kids right and be a good example to them, but then it gets back to verse 8 of chapter 1. They have to listen to the father's instruction and not forsake their mother's teaching. They have a choice, right? In other words, they have a choice. So, and a lot of us, we know that. I mean, our parents did a great job, but we still made stupid choices. Maybe that's just me. You know, we still did the stupid years or whatever it was for some people. So that's very interesting to note. So this is where it starts with this introduction. Here I am. I'm Solomon, son of David, king of Israel, and I want to give you wisdom. I want to help you to live a prudent, wise, great life. And that's what this is for. Now then, after that, the next 9 chapters, okay, 8+ chapters are a contrast between wisdom and folly. A contrast between wisdom and folly. For nearly 8 chapters here, Solomon explains the difference between wisdom and folly. What's another word for folly? Being a fool. Okay? Folly is when you're acting the fool, being foolish, right? Now, he does it with different types of illustrations. Basically, he says over and over, if you're wise, you do this. If you're foolish, you'll do that. And this is a major part of his warnings. And there's a big chunk in here where he talks about adultery as a huge, huge thing. It's for him, it seems to be the epitome of foolishness, which is kind of weird since he has 700 wives. So I don't know what that means. But it's an illustration, all of it, it's an illustration of how foolishness leads to disaster. Okay, over and over in there. This is what wisdom does, wise people do this, what foolish people do, and there's going to be disaster if you do the foolish things. All right, the next section are the Proverbs of Solomon, for lack of a better title, from chapter 10, verse 1. Okay, chapter 10 to verse 1 to chapter 24. So a big chunk, the majority of the book are the Proverbs of Solomon. They're simply collected by Solomon's men. And in your notes it says there's no connection here. Okay? No connection in these Proverbs. It's not like chapter 10 is all about work, and chapter 11 is all about money, and chapter 12 is all about relationships. No! It's like each of these Proverbs was written down on a little piece of paper. Have you been to like a Chinese restaurant lately and you get the fortune cookie at the end and your fortune at the end? It's kind of like every one of these Proverbs was put on a little piece of paper like that, and they were thrown up in the air and collected in a basket, and then they were just put, they're that random, it seems. You know, they're not connected at all. They're not sectioned into, this chapter's about this. No, you could go from one verse, one proverb on work, and the next proverb on anger, and then the next proverb on a relationship. Like, they're just all mixed up. They're not connected one to another. Now, you can, and I've done this, you could preach a sermon on work and work ethic from the book of Proverbs, but you're picking a verse from 10 and a verse from 12 and a verse from 14 and you're finding these verses and you're collecting them and putting together because they're not already gathered up in an orderly fashion here. Does that make sense? Okay, and you've probably noticed that already even as you were reading, okay? Now, there are some basic themes, and I know there's not a lot of room there, so you might have to move beyond the dotted line in your notes. But some of the themes where there are multiple proverbs on these subjects include laziness. Okay, laziness. And you might want to put work in brackets after that. How hard are you working, or are you lazy? There's lots of verses about, the lazy person and what will happen to them. And greed. Greed, a lot of verses about greed and what happens if you're a greedy person. as you'd expect, there are a lot of verses of how God will honor the righteous person. The person who is righteous, puts their faith in God, and as we saw Sunday, they're devout and want to follow God and do what he says. Pride. Bunch of verses about pride. Pride goeth before the fall. That doesn't mean autumn. It means thank you. A lot of verses about sexuality in here. Verses about discretion. I've preached sermons on the use of the tongue, just looking through the book of Proverbs and what it says about, the power of the tongue. It can break the bones. So, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me is not actually true. They can hurt, absolutely. Gossip, again, another use of the tongue. The use of money, again, whole sermons on the use of money from the book of Proverbs, as the wisest man ever says, this is what happens when you're greedy, when you want money. But again, you're picking these verses from all over in these 14 chapters, well, and beyond the whole book of Proverbs. The use of wine, and it does talk about drunkenness. This is interesting. There are interesting verses here on that too. Most people don't realize that in Bible days, nobody ever drank wine straight. Okay, never. It was always cut with water, at least 3-1, sometimes as much as 10-1. So if you're reading some of these verses here in the book of Proverbs, it says, woe to those who look at wine when it sparkles in the cup, meaning it's still undiluted, and you're drinking it, whatever it is, 11% alcohol, and you're drinking. I mean, how did they have these wedding feasts that went for 7 days? Of drinking, right? Ever wonder that? Like, wow, how quickly were before they were plastered and then days and days. No, it was always cut at least 3-1 and sometimes as much as 10-1 here too. So Solomon's talking about that, the people who are just drinking it straight, and that's not right and all. Lying, of course, borrowing, saving. There are lots of themes here because he's looking at all of humanity, all of his fellow Israelites, probably looking at other leaders, and there are some verses, some proverbs about leadership in there too, and making all these observations coming out of his great wisdom as he had it too. And remember, I think we said this before, these proverbs would have been things that he said, wise sayings that he said over the course of his whole life, but probably most, in the prime of life, middle age. Next week, we're going to look at the Song of Songs when he's just this young dude. He is young, and it starts before he's become king, and he meets the woman who's going to be his first wife and his true love, and they share a name. What? They share a name, yes. It's not Pat and Pat, but it's... No. They share a name. His name is Shuleman. Her name is Shulamit. The male, the masculine, and the feminine of the same name. And they're in love. And they get married, and they have a honeymoon night. And don't read those white pages till next week. But you'll see some of this. So that's great. Young, in love, it's erotic, especially if you read it in Hebrew, and that's why I'm giving you those other sheets here. But then, next week, we're also going to look at Ecclesiastes, which he writes in his old age. And it's like, and as you read that for next week too, it's just 12 chapters for Ecclesiastes, and oh man, it's so sad. I tried it all. I did it all. I owned it all. I thought through it all. And when it all is done and said, I just find it all meaningless. The King James said, vanity, vanity, all is vanity. Meaningless, all meaningless. Because by his old age, he had really turned away from the Lord. And it's very, very sad. Remember all of his wives, he allowed them to bring in their foreign idols and even set up altars to them in Jerusalem and stuff. And oh man, it's sad. And as you read Ecclesiastes for next week, again, in his old age, he's afraid. He's afraid of getting old. Chapter 12, he describes, like his bones creaking and his teeth missing and his hearing going. And it's like, holy cow, man. And even before that, he's afraid that nobody's going to remember him, when he dies, like who will care 100 years from now? He doesn't say it quite that way, but he's afraid that nobody will, what difference will he have made in his life have made? And, nobody remembers. Like it's the saddest thing. So you've got 3 periods of his life, this week and next, in 3 different books, and we got these snapshots. And the one, he's just this hot young guy, woohoo, getting married. And then the rest is probably the majority of life that we're looking at tonight, where here's the wisdom that he asked God for, and God gave him, and you just see it coming out. And then at the end, he's old and like, oh. There you go. You don't have to come back next week. I just gave it all to you right there. You'll see as we look at that. But here, he's in the prime of life. He's got the wisdom God has given him. He's observing things and he's capturing, rights and wrongs and the best versus, not good choices and stuff. So a question, Jeff.
How do you defend the notion that, to me, that really cuts into his credibility? As far as like
The Ecclesi-
wives, and yet there's a whole paragraph 5 on. To me, it's hypocrisy in a capital H.
Yeah. Okay, so the question is, how can he be so wise when he's got 700 wives and he's talking about, relationships and that kind of stuff? Pardon?
Adultery and so on.
Adultery and all too. Well, they wouldn't have considered it adultery if he's actually married to these women. And it was what was expected, that, hey, you're the daughter of the king, so you're going to go and marry that king, and it's that. Yeah, they didn't know any better, right or wrong. And so that wouldn't have been considered adultery. Now, what David did, which we saw, weeks and weeks ago, that was adultery. That was another man's wife. Not my wife, number 643, which just it boggles our minds, right? Boggles our minds. But he took another man's wife and even killed the guy, and so that's definitely wrong. So, okay, let's go on. Okay, within this section, all right, the Proverbs of Solomon's men, copied by Solomon's men here. Or wait, not yet. Chapters 10 to 15 are the but Proverbs. Now, we read a couple of those earlier. The but Proverbs. The wise woman builds her house, but with her own hands the foolish one tears hers down. He whose walk is upright fears the Lord, but he whose ways are devious despises him. And I just opened at random, into chapter 14, that was 13. And you just see these, and on they go, chapter after chapter. Each one, different than the previous one, because they were just collected, thrown up, caught and put together here. So we've got these. All right. You know what? Let's take a break, and we will come back, because this is a shorter lesson, and so we'll take our break right now and then come back to section 4. All right? 10 minutes. You know what? Let's make it 11. You're welcome. Again, if you didn't get a bulletin from Sunday, grab one off the table back there too, and notes from Sunday are in there, and all the information is there. All right, are you ready? Shall we continue? All right, before we start, Barb was just reminding me that there is a Christian Christmas movie, at the theater up on Woodlawn here right now. It's just only there a week. How many of you have ever seen episodes of The Chosen? Oh yeah, most. Yeah, vast majority. It's amazing. It's great. We have a couple of the books from the first 2 seasons. It's walking through the life of Jesus in a fantastically well-produced form of episodes. I highly recommend it. And of course, if you ever watched the Jesus video, like every word is from the Gospel of Luke. Well, this is taking all 4, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, all 4 Gospels and trying to stitch together, like where the different stories from the different Gospels go, and super well done, highly well produced. And so if you're not watching it, I would encourage you to do that. 3 seasons are out. And you can watch it free online. And anyway, they're great. But there are a couple of Christmas parts that they've put together into a Christmas movie that's on at the theater. So what's it called, Barb? Do you know? Who knows what it's called? Christmas with the Chosen is... Oh, Holy Night or something like that. Yeah, Oh, Holy Night. Yeah, something. It's the one that's not about Nakahimi Plaza or something. Anyway, no, anybody? Never mind. Okay, you ready? All right, let's resume. Okay, so, yeah. All right, part 4, the 4th section of the book of Proverbs, are what I was talking about earlier. These are Proverbs copied by Hezekiah's men. So chapters 25 to 29 are Proverbs of Solomon that were floating around, for the next 200 years. Like I said before, it doesn't appear that Solomon ever sat down to write all of his observations on life. He just, made these. Maybe he did some, but they got collected, and these are 4 more chapters, that were collected 200 years later by King Hezekiah and the men that he commissioned to do that. Excuse me. Quoted by people, handed down orally over the next 200 years. And Hezekiah the king appointed men to write these down so that they would not be lost. All right, section 5. Okay, in your notes. Yeah, written 200 years after Solomon. Written down 200 years after Solomon would probably be a better way of putting that. Solomon's Proverbs, but we need to write these down. And so they did, finally. Okay. The 5th section, as I mentioned earlier, this is the wisdom of King Agur, okay? The wisdom of King Agur, or Agur, if you will. Now, this is a guy, this is a king, this is a name that nobody knows about, okay? Nobody knows anything about it. He's not mentioned anywhere else in Scripture, but his name, Agur, is collector. So this is King Collector. Isn't that interesting, right? King Collector, if you will. So lots of scholars have suggested that this is actually just another name for Solomon. He's using a pseudonym, a pen name, if you will. Since this guy, Agur, is not mentioned anywhere else in scriptures or anywhere. So others say that his name comes from the fact that he collected Solomon's sayings and then put them down many years later. It could be Hezekiah calling himself King Collector of Solomon's. We don't know. But there are more Proverbs. There's a whole chapter 30, filled with them. And again, good, wise observations of life. King Agur. All right. Nothing is known of this king. His name means collector, as I said, and many suggest that Agur is just another name for Solomon. Don't see this name anywhere else in the Bible. Don't see his name anywhere else in history. King Agur. Proverbs 30, chapter 30. All right? There are those who curse their fathers and do not bless their mothers, those who are pure in their own eyes, and yet they are not cleansed of their filth. Those whose eyes are ever so haughty, whose glances are so disdainful. Just more observations. There are terrible people out there in just the section that I read there for a moment. All right, then, part 6 is the sayings of King Lemuel. King Lemuel. And once again, nothing is known of this guy, this king either, but Lemuel means devoted to Elohim, devoted to God. All right? We don't know anything about him. Again, many people would suggest that this is just another name for Solomon, where Solomon had written these down and said, here I'm just devoted to God. Again, back in his youth, before he started marrying all these women, and they led him astray, and he made the choice. By the way, whenever I say that, I'm not blaming the women entirely, because he made the choice, right? He was the king. He could have kept their idols out. He could have kept altars out. No way. So he's fully involved here. But anyway, at one point, if it's Solomon, he just under this name, King Lemuel, king devoted to God, but we don't know anything about him. And there's just 9 verses there by this guy. All right? Again, many scholars think this is Solomon too. All right. And then we have the epilogue. The epilogue. Last chapter, the rest of that chapter, verses 10 to 31. And this is the picture of the perfect woman. The perfect woman. If you've ever read it, you know what I'm talking about. She's beautiful. She's delightful. She does everything right. She raises children. She cooks. She runs businesses. She buys and sells property. She's like, there you go. Totally. Like, seriously, you read through this, and there's nothing this gal can't do and isn't doing. Like, she's perfect. She's perfect. Way, way back, when I was a young pastor, a couple of times I preached from this passage, on Mother's Day as to, what a woman should be like. And I haven't for the last 30 years. Again, I did not say all women have to be like this. This is, like it says here, she's the ideal, right? She's the ideal. You look to attain that, but don't become depressed when you can't quite reach these lofty heights. I mean, sometimes as a mom, all you're looking for is a night's sleep, right? Forget everything else. Wow. It's amazing. It's quite a chapter, like her children rise up and call her blessed. Her husband is a city official as he sits at the city gates, and it's all her behind him. She's amazing. She's amazing. Wonderful. But you could get a little depressed if you think, I don't measure up to half of this stuff. Yeah, that's actually pretty typical. Okay.
Is the perfect man written somewhere else?
Yes, his name is Jesus. Yep. There's not a passage like that, no. Maybe the closest would be, there's a passage in Timothy and one in Titus, and those guys were young pastors that were sent to churches to pastor them by the Apostle Paul. Well, Paul writes and says, as you're picking elders, leaders, deacons in your church, make sure they're this and this and this and this. And so that would be the closest you could come to like the perfect man, would be those descriptions of church leaders, as Paul gives them. And they're great. Good reputation and lots of stuff. Okay. Good. Now, that's the end of the lesson. Except, I'd like us to quickly go through and read a whole bunch of people's favorite Proverbs. And so let's go through these and do this. If anybody wants to come up and read some of these, that'd be great, rather than me reading all 20 of them. That'd be fine. But we'll walk through the Proverbs and we'll read through some of these. These are the most favorite. But you might have a favorite not on this list, okay? Go back to Proverbs chapter 3. Anybody wants to come up and join me? Okay, I'll just go through them. Ready? So everybody go open your Bible. If you're home, open your Bible. I'm waiting. All right. And let's walk through some of these. Now, this, again, you probably have some favorites that aren't on this list because this is not like the official list of best Proverbs. No. It's just a list. I've got a bunch here. Some of them aren't there. I'll read a bunch that I have underlined in my Bible. That'll take us another rested hour. Okay, you ready? Chapter 3, verse 1. My son, do not forget my teaching, but keep my commands in your heart, for they will prolong your life many years and bring you prosperity. Wow, that's great. Listen, follow. I've got the wisdom from God. Do it, and you'll have a longer life. And then verse 3, let love and faithfulness never leave you. Who thinks that's good advice? Love and faithfulness never leave you. Jump to 5 and say it with me. Ready? Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make your paths straight. Yeah. Good. Verse 9. Honor the Lord with your wealth, with the first fruits of all your crops. Then your barns will be filled to overflowing. Your vats will brim over with new wine. Okay. Again, we looked earlier back in November about different verses where God says, put me first, right? Put me first. Seek first my kingdom, my righteousness, and all the things, everything else will be added to you as well, right? Good. Verse 11, my son, do not despise the Lord's discipline. Okay, that's another good one too. Where are we? Shall we jump to verse 6, I guess, is next on the list? 16 to 19, everybody with me? Again, this was already read. Mitchell maybe read this. Somebody read this. There are 6 things the Lord hates, 7 that are detestable to him. Haughty eyes, a lying tongue, hands that shed innocent blood, a heart that devises wicked schemes, feet that are quick to rush into evil, a false witness who pours out lies, and a man who stirs up dissension among brothers. By the way, back to verse 16. That's another literary device that was used in Hebrew poetry. There are 6 things the Lord hates. Nope, 7 that are detestable to him. You find that frequently. I don't know what the point is. There's 6, no 7, but you'll see that fairly frequently, maybe for emphasis. Okay, jump to chapter 8 and 34 and 35. You with me? Blessed is the man who listens to me, watching daily at my doors. Oh, by the way, okay, let me stop here. This is another literary device here called personification. Okay? Now you might remember from back high school English classes, personification is when you give human qualities to an inanimate thing, right? Where you say, this church, she's beautiful. The church isn't a she, or that kind of stuff. When you're attributing human qualities to an inanimate thing. So what's happening in this section is Solomon is talking about wisdom, okay? Wisdom and gaining wisdom. And wisdom is like a beautiful woman, right? This is called personification. So that'll make more sense as I reread it, 34 and 35. Wisdom is even talking here, okay? Talking. Blessed is the man who listens to me, wisdom, watching daily at my doors, watching at my doorway. For whoever finds me finds life and receives favor from the Lord. But whoever fails to find me harms himself. All who hate me love death. Okay, so again, there's not just personification, but it's wisdom who's speaking. This is poetry, Hebrew poetry too. All right, chapter 11, verse 2. When pride comes, then comes disgrace, but with humility comes wisdom. See the contrast of humility and pride there? Chapter 12, verse 4. Oh, this was already read. Verse 1 and 2. Let's read those first. Whoever loves discipline loves knowledge, but whoever hates correction is stupid. My mom would not have liked this verse. We are not allowed to say stupid at home. Usually because, it was a sibling being referred to, right? A good man obtains favor from the Lord, but the Lord condemns a crafty man. Somebody that goes to Michael's, I guess? I don't know what that means. Oh, not that kind of crafty. I see. Okay. That was a joke. Anybody? All right. And verse 4. A wife of noble character is her husband's crown, but a disgraceful wife is like decay in his bones. She's disgraceful. It already says that, right? There's a whole bunch of those, actually. We won't read them all. All right, 12, verse 18. Let's jump down to verse 18. Reckless words pierce like a sword, but the tongue of the wise brings healing. I love that. It's so true, right? So true. Like you can use piercing, hurtful words, but you can also bring healing to somebody as you come alongside and bring encouragement and turn them to God, turn them in God's direction for sure. Good. 13:20, another good one on our list here. He who walks with the wise grows wise, but a companion of fools suffers harm. Right? What's the phrase? Good company, bad company, correct, good moral. What's the phrase?
Choose your friends well.
Choose your friends well. That's it. There's something with the word company in it. What's that one with company in it? Choose your friends well for sure. Bad company corrupts good morals. Is that it? I think that's it. Something like that. It's the same principle here from 3,000 years ago from Proverbs, from Solomon, right? A good man, okay, yeah. Chapter 15, verse 1. We read this one also. This is a famous and important one. A gentle answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. True. Is it always true? No, sometimes if you're calm, it really annoys that other person who's angry. If you gently speak back, they blow. But generally, if they're angry and you're angry back, what's happening? It's escalating. Divorce. Yeah, that's right. That's right. So a gentle answer turns away wrath. That's generally true. Okay, good. Verse 26. The Lord detests the thoughts of the wicked, but those of the pure are pleasing to him. He knows our thoughts and detests wicked thoughts, and he is pleased with wonderful thoughts, with pure thoughts. All right, 16, verse 9. In his heart, a man plans his course, but the Lord determines his steps. Yeah, that principle about how we can make all the plans in the world, but God ultimately decides what's going to happen, that's all over. That principle is all over the Bible in several places here in the Proverbs too. All right, 16:24. Pleasant words are a honeycomb, sweet to the soul and healing to the bones. Again, like a whole sermon on just, your talk, the power of your words, either for good or for harm. All right, 19:21, let's jump to that. In my older Bible, I had a lot more of these marked. 19:21. Many are the plans in a man's heart, but it is the Lord's purpose that prevails. There's that same principle again, right? Chapter 21, verses 30 and 31. There is no wisdom, no insight, no plan that can succeed against the Lord. Yeah, and then verse 31 says, the horse is made ready for the day of battle, but victory rests with the Lord. All right, good. And of course, 22:6, very famous. right? It's a great verse. It's just not a promise. Train a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not turn from it. And again, that's usually true. That's usually true. That's an encouragement. Parents, train your children well, properly, in the right way, God's way. 23, 13 and 14. Is that up there? No. I want to read that. I got it marked in my Bible. Do not withhold discipline from a child. If you punish him with the rod, he will not die. Punish him with the rod and save his soul from death. Okay, interesting, right? And then jump to 29. Who has woe? All right, so here's the verse I was talking to you about alcohol earlier. So follow along with this. This is verses 29 to the end, to 35. Who has woe? Who has sorrow? Who has strife? Who has complaints? Who has needless bruises? Who has bloodshot eyes? Are you listening to these things, right? It's those who linger over wine, who go to sample bowls of mixed wine. Do not gaze at wine when it is red, when it sparkles in the cup, when it goes down smoothly. In the end, it bites like a snake and poisons like a viper. Your eyes will see strange sights. Your mind imagine confusing things. You'll be like one sleeping in the high seas, lying on top of the rigging. They hit me, you'll say, but I'm not hurt. They beat me up, but I don't feel it. When will I wake up so I can find another drink? Wow. And again, the context of that was, when they were drinking it straight, because it was usually cut with water. And again, there are a couple of reasons for that. One, the stream you're drinking from, the animals are standing in just upstream a little bit. A little alcohol in there, even though they might not have fully understood it, going to help you to stay healthy when you're drinking that same water. They did not have water purification plants. You know that, right? So it was good, healthy. All right, jump over to 24. Verses 3 and 4. By wisdom a house is built, and through understanding it is established. Through knowledge its rooms are filled with rare and beautiful treasures. Again, look at, there's again some real poetic stuff there. And verse 14, 24:14. Know also that wisdom is sweet to your soul. If you find it, there's a future hope for you, and your hope will not be cut off. You're wise, okay? Follow God's wisdom here too. And then look at verse 24. This is, okay, forgive me. I try to avoid political stuff, but look at this verse. Chapter 24, verse 24. Whoever says to the guilty, you're innocent, peoples will curse him and nations denounce him, but it will go well with those who convict the guilty, and rich blessing will come upon them. And there's a word for all that, justice, right? I got that written down in the margin there. If somebody's guilty, they should pay the penalty, right? Okay, good. 27:17. Innocent people should not be punished, for sure. All right, so 27:17. This is another famous one. We use it a lot in men's ministries. As iron sharpens iron, so one man sharpens another. Two guys there helping each other out, helping each other to stay on track, right? Sharpening each other. And then 29:25. Fear of man will prove a snare. Isn't that true? People pleasing, right? The fear of man will prove a snare, but whoever trusts in the Lord is kept safe. Okay, and does anybody have a favorite proverb that we didn't read that's not on that list? And there's lots more. Yeah, Todd.
One of my favorites is Proverbs 17:17. And I used to misinterpret when I was younger. It says, a friend loves at all times, and a brother is born for adversity. So I always read that as, because I have two younger brothers. Thanks a lot. Cause you grief, but in time and as I matured, as my brothers and I remain very close to this day, Your brother's there when the chips are down.
Yeah. Proverbs 17:17, Todd said, a friend loves at all times, and a brother is born for adversity. It doesn't mean to torture each other, adversary.
Usually.
Adversity.
Usually.
Usually, that's right. But to be there at all times, yeah, got your back. Good. Who's got another one? Anybody else? A favorite proverb? Wasn't on our list? Okay. Very good, everybody. All right, so quick review. If you could pick one word, the key word, not the key word completely, but a key word for what a proverb is a what? Truism. Truism. A wise saying fits. I mean, it's a truism. This is how things usually work, because Solomon is not, in the book of Proverbs, he's mostly not looking at God and what God does, but what's he looking at? People. And how people act and interact, and when they do foolish things and wise things, right things versus wrong things, righteous things versus wicked things, and lots of other stuff too. There's real gold in there. The wisdom of the wisest man who ever lived distilled. So good. So next week, we will look at the Song of Songs and Ecclesiastes. And so the pink paper was the little Psalms quiz for tonight. Next week, I already passed out the 5 pages on 3 sheets on the sexual allusions in the Song of Songs. You can, if you'd like, you can read through that as you read through the Song of Songs. Now, we've been talking as we're in Hebrew poetry about Hebrew literature, poetic literature, stuff like personification, all that. There's a specific way specific way the Song of Songs is laid out that I want to tell you about so you can understand what's going on. All right? It's a specific kind of Hebrew poetry where it tells the story forwards, and then it gets a peak in the middle, and it tells the story again backwards. Okay? So as you read it, you'll think, what is going on as you read? You will totally like, what is this? But that's what's going on, okay? The stories come forwards, and then it gets to a peak, and then it's told backwards. Like, for instance, at one point, he describes her from her head down to her feet, and the next time from her feet up to her head, and okay, now it makes sense, because everything's gone backwards, It's doing it kind of in reverse. So you'll see that. There are some verses you'll find a little bit risque. If you are reading them in Hebrew, or if you go along with that guide as you read, you will blush. Read by yourself. There's interesting stuff there too, but we'll also look at Ecclesiastes, which is in his old age, and it's just sad, but it gives us such insights, again, into kind of despair in old age, but more than that, like, what is life really about? If you had all the money in the world and all the power in the world, and you could do anything you wanted in the world, I think most people would think that would be the life. I could really experience everything then. Well, here's a man who did exactly that, and we see how he describes what he did, what he said, what he thought about it all, and what he thought about it, once he had done that too. So very interesting 2 books we'll look at, and then we'll take a break for the next 2 weeks till January 10th. All right, let's pray. Well, are there any questions first before we wrap up? All right, God, thank you for giving Solomon the wisdom, and yes, he didn't always follow his own wisdom, his own advice. And he paid the price. And Lord, I just pray that you would help us as we glean from your word, including the wonderful Proverbs that we see. Help us to follow his advice, which is your advice through him. Lord, may we be wise and not foolish. Help us remember that he started by saying, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. And so may we have that awe, that fear, that wonder about our Creator and Savior too. In Jesus' name, amen. All right. Good night. See you Sunday.